So in 1999, IR35, which is a piece of case law, was introduced by the HMRC because they felt that the contractors were tax evaders. And they thought that they were getting too many tax breaks and making life too easy for them. But what they forgot was that contractors are the lifeblood of the flexible workforce, and actually perhaps maybe they don't have employment rights, they don't have longevity of employment, they don't get things like pension. Maybe a little bit of tax efficiency, a little bit of a tax break would be good for them. So what we're doing here is weighing up the risks and rewards of being in business on your own account. And perhaps that's what the point that HMRC were missing at the time. They have to have their own accountant, they raise invoices that don't get paid, they have to be written off, and that's the thing. But so there are three main points to IR35, three main tests: substitution, control, and mutuality of obligation. Do I have to give you work? Do you have to take work? But what we forget is you only need to pass one test. So most temporary contractors pass that one test. What's changed? IR35 has been the same since 1999. It still is the same. Everybody thinks it's changed. It hasn't changed. All that's happened is that the liability for that stays with the contractor, but it also moves up the supply chain. And that's where the agencies get worried. So the liability for that sits with the contractor and it moves up the supply chain. And that's why agencies are so worried about it, because all of a sudden, all the liability, if that contractor is found to be a disguised employee, that's their problem. So let's look at the supply chain here. We're going to stay on this for 15 seconds. We've got the public sector at the top, the agency in the middle, the personal service company, and then the worker. And as I said, IR35, that's where the liability traditionally sits. So what they've done, the clever, because they weren't very good at collecting the taxes here or penalising people that they felt were tax evaders, they've moved the problem, well, additionally put the problem up to the fee payer, being the agency. So suddenly you're liable for it. That's why you're worried. It gets even worse though, because the decision about whether somebody's caught in IR35 or not caught sits at the top of the chain there. Now, are they IR35 experts? Are they able to make that decision? Probably not. And this is what we saw. Complete chaos, absolute chaos. 2 years ago, in April 2017, we saw between January, well, they announced it in October, and by the time we got between January and April, it went mad. All the accountants were saying, oh, it doesn't affect you. That's because they didn't understand IR35. My business, we did 1,120 tests in that time, and 87% of them actually passed and should have been carried on in that way. The public sector said 52% of them were actually caught by IR35. How wrong is that? And they were left to the last minute. On the 5th of April, people were having their contracts cancelled. So it's absolutely terrible. And individuals, you're talking about somebody on £300 a day affected to the tune of £10,000 a year. How fair is that, if they're not? So we saw mass migration. Loads of contractors said, we're not going to work in the public sector. I'm going to take my business elsewhere, if they could. We saw mass migration out of the country. People like nurses who are happily working in a contractor environment, leaving the country. Transport for London, that was hilarious. They did great big blanket assumptions, and all the signalmen walked out. Critical roles. So what they're saying now is, what you've got to do is you've got to prepare early. You need to take expert advice on IR35. It's not a grey area, it's a complex area. Don't make blanket assessments. Every single individual contractor needs to be assessed. And you need to look up the chain. If you're an agency, look at your contractors. How are they going to be affected? Talk to your clients. Don't hide behind it. And unfortunately, many will end up having to go PAYE or umbrella, because sometimes that's the decision that's been made. If you are going to go umbrella, make sure it's an accredited, FCSA accredited umbrella partner, because you don't want to end up with offshore arrangements or tax evasion. So Philip Hammond, what did he do? He said, oh, this is lovely, we're making a fortune. He said yesterday how well the tax take was going. Well, not a surprise, because he's doubled what he thought he was going to get. So if you think this isn't going to come to the private sector, you've got another thing coming. It's definitely going to come to the private sector. The consultation's on at the moment. So, as an agency, what do you need to do? Communication is key. You need to speak to your contractors. You need to understand their position. You need to get them IR35 assessed. You need to take that assessment to your client and be brave enough to have that conversation with them. Don't just go with the blanket assessment. If you do those things and you'll be smart, you'll survive the IR35 situation.